With regard to the announcement that Governor Corbett made on the $45 million, I think many of you know that over the past few weeks and months, but in more recent times, I guess about 3 weeks ago, on the first day that the General Assembly was back, I think that was September 23rd, I was in Harrisburg, had a meeting with Governor Corbett and some of his top folks. We talked about a number of issues. The $45 million was one, and I did my best to make the case here from Philadelphia, including many of the comments that have been made by Council President Clark, members of the General Assembly, that in any number of areas, it was my belief that in reading the language in the tax code related to the fiscal code, rather, related to the $45 million, or the fiscal code related to the sales tax, that it was my belief that the school district, based on actions over the past year or so, it certainly met the test of having begun a series of reforms in operations, in management, finances, and education, and that these funds were desperately needed. Again, let us not forget, the $45 million was a part of the governor's proposal from back at budget time to help fill a $304 million hole that we sought to fill through a variety of proposals that we made both here locally and at the state. And made the case that these funds were desperately needed, that personnel needed to be called back to support our students and assist in their education. And obviously there's still contract negotiations going on and other matters that need to be taken care of here in Philadelphia. That was back on September 23rd. I think many of you know I was in Harrisburg yesterday and meeting with both legislative leaders in the House and the Senate and representatives of the governor. I did not meet with the governor yesterday, but some of his top personnel made the same argument and the same request. I'll answer the first question that I assume many of you will ask is that no, I did not know that they were going to make this particular announcement today, and there was no indication yesterday that the announcement would be made today, but clearly this was an active topic of conversation. They made the decision, however they made it. For that, I'm certainly appreciative that these funds apparently are being released. They are desperately needed to continue the callback of personnel that are needed in our schools to further facilitate a positive educational environment for our young people. Having said that, filling that budget gap is still the primary objective now and into the future. So the cigarette tax is still sitting in Harrisburg. That represents significant dollars for the school district, and we need action by the General Assembly, and hopefully, if passed by the General Assembly, the governor's signature on that particular measure. Here at home, we still have a sales tax measure that needs to be passed by City Council. You already know that there is this idea that we'd like to see a split in the sales tax between the school district and the city's pension fund. Of course, that only really works if the sales tax is passed as well. Otherwise, the district would actually lose money in that particular proposal. But ultimately, where we really need to focus our attention longer term is in a stable, regular, and recurring funding formula, a new funding formula, takes into account student population, student needs, and other challenges that students in the 500 school districts across the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania have, and that my focus is really on the near-term issues that I just addressed, but really working to get a new state education funding formula that is student-weighted, that puts Pennsylvania with the other 47 states in the United States of America that use that kind of formula and many other criteria to properly fund education all across the Commonwealth, and certainly here in Philadelphia. So appreciative on the release, but that is only a small component of a larger issue in the near term and for the future.
Did you talk to the governor at all today, since you've got word that 45 million was released?
I have not talked to the governor today. I did talk to his chief of staff. I think he's been a little busy up in Harrisburg.
Mm-hmm. And what did you say to him?
Well, I didn't talk to the governor.
I know, but to the chief of staff.
I said, thanks for letting me know. And I'll be talking to you further about the other measures that are still in Harrisburg, the cigarette tax that still needs to be passed, as well as new education funding for it. I mean, that's my focus and mission, near term and long term.
When you talked to his representatives yesterday, was there anything that you think was said differently that may have put pressure on, or do you think reality just set in?
Well, I'm not going to try to figure out how they made the decision. My argument has been consistent and has been the same. The need is there. I believe the test has been met in terms of the many, many things that the school district has done operationally, whether it's closing the 31 schools over the last 18 months. They've cut about $700 million out of their budget. They've slashed the administrative side of the district at 440 North Broad Street significantly. They're less than 50% of the people working there now than were working there 2 years ago, and a variety of other steps that they've made. So my view has been, when you read the language, it's fairly broad, but it talks about that the district has begun these reforms. Clearly the case can be made that many of those reforms had already begun and continued. And so, that was what I said yesterday, it's what I said 3 weeks ago, it's what I said a few months ago. How they made the decision, I don't know. You'll have to ask them. Glad they made it. Appreciate the dollars. Let's keep working.
Mayor, tomorrow City Council is expected to give final approval to the transfer ordinance for $50 million, obviously part of Council President Clark's plan. And will you be signing that once it's approved?
I never predict what I'm going to do with a piece of legislation until it actually gets to my desk and the time in which, as the charter provides, for me to take action. The larger issue here is that the discussion continues between myself and the Council President, our administration, and City Council about how we fulfill, and we will, the $50 million pledge that had already been made some time ago, which resulted in a number of administrators and staff being called back, back in August before school started. So we'll keep working on it.
But your legislation, as you know, for the sales tax plan, which was actually the governor's plan,
right,
has yet to even be introduced.
Right.
At the same time, the Council President's plan is up for final passage.
All items of discussion and conversation, we still have time on our clock to deal with these issues, and as well as the issues up in Harrisburg. There's a lot of interrelatedness.
Do you have more time on your clock now? The state had said their money was going to be the last money in. So now do you have more time than the original deadline of like December, January to come up with the 50?
No. The $50 million has in essence already been accounted for in the district's budget. They've brought the people back. 45 certainly helps. But again, let's not get distracted by the smaller numbers. It was a $304 million hole. These dollars, as large as they sound, are parts of filling the $304 million hole, and there's still a component that is sitting out there, which of course is savings from the ongoing contract negotiations. So there's still a lot of work to be done. Mindful of clock management, and we're in regular conversations with the Council President and City Council upstairs on these issues. We'll get it done.
How do you get the concessions from the labor unions? What can you do to help in that process?
I think the best thing that I can do to help is to allow the school district and the SRC, who are the negotiators and the contract signers, to do their work. They're staying at the table, which I think is the most positive sign in all of this. And through everything else that's happened, their discussions and negotiations have continued. I think that's a very, very positive sign. And they're trying to work toward ultimately getting a contract that respects the great hard work of the teachers, but also takes into account the financial reality of where we are right now. When you have a $304 million deficit, you have to close that and take a variety of steps, and everyone has to do their part.
What would you say to parents who are concerned about having to go through this all over again next year?
We shouldn't have to go through this next year, which is why, if we had a proper, rational, open, transparent, understandable student-weighted education formula, then we would know what we were getting on a regular basis, and we would not be going through this hat-in-hand routine each and every year. It's disgraceful. We can do better, and that's my goal, that's our effort, and let's focus our attention on that through the course of this year and into next year's budget process.
Mayor, given the financial difficulties of the district and the city, some are talking about payments in lieu of taxes as a possible solution or part of the solution to increasing revenue. Do you think that's a good idea? Is that something the city should explore?
We've looked at that in the past. Unfortunately, this city and all other cities across the Commonwealth's efforts in that regard were severely hampered by a piece of legislation, I think a couple years ago, called Act 55. And certainly any money raised would be helpful, but again, those dollars would be, in the larger scheme of things, when you're talking about an organization with a $2.8 billion budget, would be rather small in the whole scheme of things. The Commonwealth of Pennsylvania has a constitutional responsibility to provide a thorough and efficient education. And certainly we have put together all manner of bits and pieces here and there. City Council passed the cigarette tax, 16-0. It's $45 million in the first half year toward implementation, $80+ million for the full year. There's not one reason in the world that any legislator outside of the city of Philadelphia should care whether or not we charge extra for cigarettes here in Philadelphia. Not one. And so there are any number of efforts that we've tried to take here at home to put additional dollars on the table. I've worked with City Council. We put $155 million annually in new money on the table since FY10 because we're trying to do our part here. The Commonwealth of Pennsylvania needs a real funding formula for education. And certainly a few million here and a few million there are always helpful. But that's not the way you really truly fund education if you care about education. You have a funding formula that everyone can understand. We recognize that this is the largest school district in the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania. We educate 200,000 students, 62,000 of whom are in charter schools. More than half of the charter schools in the state are in Philadelphia. There used to be a separate line item for charter school funding. That was collapsed and then all cut. So, we're willing to look at a variety of strategies and ideas, but that doesn't get away from the larger, longer term, more stable source of funding, which certainly is both the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania and the City of Philadelphia.
What is the status of the education and supply fund that the fundraising goal was yesterday, or deadline?
Not so much a deadline. We set out a challenge when we announced this, I believe, actually back on September 11th. We said we wanted to raise $500,000 by October 15th, both amount and date, just picked as a way of challenging the community out there. As of, I think yesterday, we had $431,000 and a number of funders who are making callbacks to indicate what their support is. That's, of course, $431,000 more than we had the day before the announcement, and a whole lot of kids and teachers will be the beneficiaries. So, overall successful effort. It's not like the site is going to close. This is an ongoing effort, and folks will continue to contribute. And I'm very, very appreciative of all the folks who made small, medium, and large contributions to this effort. And Philadelphians rally around the students and teachers of the city. So, a good effort is a first-time out proposal, and in a little more than a month, nearly $450,000 in hand to help. So notices will go out to the schools very, very shortly about the operations and process and procedure about how to access those dollars and get those supplies in our schools. But overall a great effort, and we'll continue the fundraising.
Thank you.
All right. Good. Thanks everyone.